And welcome back, fellow football fanatics. This is College Football with Sam. How are we all doing today? Lots of stuff to talk about, some transfer portal mayhem, and I have some more thoughts on the semifinals that I want to share with you. Before we begin, make sure to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, comment your thoughts down below, and just engage with me. These streams are a lot more enjoyable when you engage with me. But yeah, it's been chaotic in the portal to say the least. It seems like we have schools that started off strong and are now focused on other things, like Indiana. Seems like other schools are just going absolutely ballistic, like Texas Tech or LSU. I think there are schools that are flying under the radar at certain positions, like Texas A&M, and we'll talk about some of these schools today. Others we'll talk about later, and there's going to be a lot more chaos and a lot more mayhem in the portal, just because of how. Look, it opened the 2nd, it closes the 16th. We're not even halfway through the time in which the portal has opened. That will be Friday the 9th when the final college football playoff semifinal game is played. First and foremost, I do want to get into some bold predictions for the semifinal games. That's what I want to talk about here. And then we'll go on to a few other topics about the Peach Bowl specifically. And we also are going to discuss Nebraska and Penn State and some of these schools that I think have done well in the transfer portal so far and have gotten off to a fast start. But first and foremost, let's do bold predictions for Miami versus Ole Miss. Bold predictions for the Fiesta Bowl between the Miami Hurricanes and the Ole Miss Rebels. Miami is favored by 3.5 points with a 12-2 record. They are 5th in FPI. Ole Miss is 13-1, and in ESPN's FPI, they are ranked 9th, or technically rated 9th. What are some bold predictions I have for this game that is taking place on January 8th at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time? Well, first and foremost, I believe that Miami gets 4 sacks at the minimum. This might be ridiculous and could easily be proven wrong, because if Chambliss has another Cam Newton-esque game like he did against Georgia in the Sugar Bowl, then this is toast or close to it. I think that Miami has a much better defensive front in terms of its front four than Georgia does. Linebackers, you'd probably go Georgia. I'd probably go with Miami at defensive back, though. Miami just has a better defense than Georgia. I think that it has a better coordinator. It has more talent, especially along the defensive line. And when you look at what Miami has done against mobile QBs this year, they've done a very good job keeping contain and making sure that the quarterback can't scramble, can't get outside the pocket and make plays outside of that. So they did pretty well there against SMU. They did a good job against Marcel Reed. Julian Sayin is not a scrambling quarterback, tends to move backwards in the pocket when under pressure, but Sayin has had a knack for escaping pressure before and finding someone downfield. He couldn't do that against Miami one bit. And this front is not only really great at containing their opponents. You also saw it against Byron Brown and DJ Lagway earlier in the year, but they manhandle offensive lines to the point where there really isn't a place to escape, because you don't have offensive linemen who recover from initially being beaten and can block. Miami just pushes them down and gets to you. And I think that Ruben Bain and Akeem Mesidor and Ahmad Moten and David Blay will do a good job getting to Ole Miss and Trinidad Chambliss there and getting a lot of pressure. And I think that the analytics back this up here, where Ole Miss does a good job at preventing havoc plays for sure, but Miami does a better job creating them than Ole Miss does. And Chambliss only has 3 interceptions thrown. He does not fumble almost all of Ole Miss's havoc plays on offense that they create, which is negative. If you're the defense creating havoc plays, it's a positive. If you're an offense creating them, it's a negative. Almost all of them are sacks and tackles for loss. So Miami is wonderful at doing that, and I would not be shocked even if Trinidad Chambliss has a turnover in this scheme due to the pressure that he will be under. Also look at the line yards between Ole Miss and Miami on the spider charts. Miami much better in terms of line yard stuff percentage and slightly better in havoc rate than the Rebels are. Bold prediction number 2 is that Miami has another defensive TD. I don't know if this will be a pick 6. I don't know if it'll be a fumble recovery for 6, but we saw a fumble 6 for Georgia when Kawan Lacey fumbled it. And I just think that this Miami defense is the best defense by a good bit that Ole Miss has played all year. It's much better than Oklahoma. They get better pressure. They cover better in the secondary. Same thing against Georgia's defense. And really outside of those two defenses, Ole Miss hasn't faced a great unit there in the regular season. Like when they played Florida, Florida's defense early in the year was fantastic. That team quit the longer the season went on. They weren't playing the same Florida team that existed earlier in the season. So whether it's Keontae Scott or Mohamed Toure, or maybe it is one of the defensive linemen, Miami will have a defensive touchdown in this game. And again, looking at the havoc plays, looking at how Miami's defense is pretty much able to match Ole Miss's offense or surpass them in every category except the explosives, I think that they will have their way at times on the lines of scrimmage. And I will say, I believe that Ole Miss will have a big play for a touchdown. I think they will generate some explosives. But I think on the flip side of that, Miami will be able to create some big plays defensively of their own in what I expect to be a very back and forth game where Miami comes out on top and covers the spread. And they just have a knack, this defense does, at being in the right place at the right time, making big plays and impactful plays, and winning games for their team. Bold prediction number 3 is that the lines of scrimmage are one-sided. This shouldn't really surprise anyone, honestly. Miami can run the football well. They're healthy on the O-line. They're healthy on the D-line. A lot of their analytical rushing struggles are because their rushing offense is very much like Michigan's in 2023, where analytically in 2023, Michigan did not run the football well. Their yards per carry was low. Their rushing success rate was low. That was because they never had any explosive runs. And Miami is very similar. They often do not get these 40, 50, 60-yard gashes that, say, an Oregon does. But in having watched Oregon's rushing offense and watching more of Miami's in the playoffs, Miami's rushing attack would be preferred to Oregon's right now. I think Indiana's would be too. All of those rushing offenses would be preferred to Ole Miss's because Ole Miss's relies mostly on broken tackles, and Kawan Lacey being exceptional, and a fundamentally sound and strong defense will snuff that out easier than an elite offensive line being the main cause for a fantastic rushing offense. Miami will win the lines of scrimmage battle. They'll win the yards per carry battle. They'll win, I think, the yards before contact battle. And since they do a good job of earning yards after contact as well, I just think they'll win pass protection, pass rush, run defense, rush offense, yards before contact. They'll get contact earlier against opposing running backs and quarterbacks than Ole Miss's defensive front will. I don't think what Ole Miss did against Georgia is sustainable. I think part of that was emotions. Part of that was Georgia not having Drew Bobo starting at center, and Georgia's defensive line being a suspect unit for much of the year. Miami is just better than Ole Miss in so many of these, success rate and EPA per play categories. And how that correlates and even is, caused by this line of scrimmage disparity is because I know that Ole Miss has wonderful wide receivers, good tight ends. They have the best running back in this game and the best quarterback in this game. So how come Miami offensively is able to do similar things or put up similar numbers? Well, look at grades, watch film, and Miami is bigger and better on the offensive line. They do a good job managing the offense and calling plays. And then on defense, Ole Miss's secondary is respectable. Their defense is respected in pass coverage, in pass defense. Where is it not respected? The defensive line. It's just a good matchup for Miami here. Number 4 is that Ole Miss outgains Miami. I think a lot of this is due to Miami having superior special teams. Miami probably winning the turnover battle here and getting a short field or two. And the idea that Ole Miss, with how they match up against Miami, where Miami's better at everything except for big plays on both sides of the football, which go Ole Miss's way. I believe that Ole Miss is going to outgain Miami in yards and yet lose by more than 3.5 points. It's going to be a very tight, close, and competitive game. Miami, because of their lines of scrimmage, will have an easier time scoring touchdowns and finishing their drives. I think a lot of Ole Miss's drives will be boom or bust, and I would not be shocked if the most successful Ole Miss drives are 1 or 2 play drives where they get an explosive, and that explosive allows them to score a touchdown despite that play not starting in the red zone. I like what Miami has to offer more in terms of sustainable offense, in terms of the turnover margin. Lines of scrimmage plays a lot into that. That's really what decides this game in Miami's favor, I think. If this was a game where lines of scrimmage were equal, I would take Ole Miss probably 9 times out of 10. But Miami is just so good there. They have a knack for forcing turnovers, right place, right time on defense. It's the 4th best defense in America when you look at the updated ESPN efficiency metrics. Texas Tech is 1, Indiana's 2, Ohio State's 3, Miami is 4th, and they're top 4, top 5 almost unanimously in multiple metrics. And for Ole Miss, when you look at what they like to do offensively, they're better at pass offense and defense according to net EPA per drive. And on defense, offensively, technically Miami has a higher success rate, but if you look at how Chambliss plays versus how Carson Beck plays, I would rather have Ole Miss's passing offense. And looking at what Ole Miss does offensively for some more game on paper numbers, look, they average 6.7 yards per play. Miami averages 6.3 yards per play. Ole Miss, their success rate isn't quite as high, but they have more explosive plays. They run for 4.8 yards per carry. Miami runs for 4.3. Miami is more of a maximize the amount of plays you run offense to keep the defense refreshed and to make sure that they can control the clock and run sustainable drives. And Ole Miss is more of a boom or bust offense. You strike out, you strike out, or you have a home run hitter. So maybe Miami could win the total yards here. This is kind of weirdly specific, but I think that Ole Miss is going to win total yards, and they're just going to come away with field goals, or they're going to come away empty in some instances. They outgained Georgia by over 100 total yards and could have lost that game. And my final bold prediction is that there will be 3 or more lead changes here. It'll be a very back and forth game, lots of different momentum. I don't think it will be super high scoring, but I do see, again, with Ole Miss winning that yards battle, I do think you're going to see Ole Miss kick a good amount of field goals, get a few touchdowns here and there, and Miami will do just enough in a back and forth game to have multiple lead changes. I think the defensive touchdown will help them. And then I think towards the end of the game, as Ole Miss's defense tires out, as some of the adrenaline wears out, and Heatherman's able to figure out this offense a little bit, that Miami will take the lead, they'll take control, and ultimately they'll win. When you look at how Miami's offense plays into this, and I think this is very important with how the game is going to go and the lead changes. Miami's offense is very, very inconsistent with moving the football because they don't get explosives. It's all about sustainable drives, and they don't have an NFL quarterback in Carson Beck. They don't have this, wonderful wide receiver core. They have a wonderful wide receiver in Malachi Toney. it's not the offense it was last year. They power run almost exclusively. Sometimes they can break one on the outside, and Beck is just not accurate enough to consistently move the football on his own. So I expect Miami to punt here, even with some of Ole Miss's struggles on defense, just because of that fact. I do also expect Miami, when they do get a sustainable drive and figure out Ole Miss's defense, to get mostly touchdowns because of the weaknesses of the Rebels, where they do an okay job stopping the pass. They cannot stop the run, though, and I think that will especially be important as the game goes on and Miami's offensive line is able to wear down Ole Miss's defensive line. Those are my 5 bold predictions for Miami versus Ole Miss. Let me know any bold predictions you have for the Fiesta Bowl down in the comment section below. Now we can talk about bold predictions for Oregon versus Indiana for the Peach Bowl. Oregon and Indiana rematch in what I called the mother of all rematches. I have some bold predictions for the Peach Bowl, which takes place Friday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time in a epic rematch between Oregon and Indiana. Indiana's favored by 3.5 points. I think all books at this point have come down to 3.5. Maybe there's still some 4s or 4.5s out there. But Indiana is favored in this rematch. They were a 7.5 point underdog in the first game between these two this season, which was a 30-20 win for Indiana in Autzen Stadium. My first bold prediction here is that Indiana wins rushing yards, total rushing yards, and yards per carry. They have the superior rushing offense here. Now, on the surface, that might be something that you think you can refute if you disagree with that claim. After all, Oregon is averaging, when you take out sacks, like around 6 yards per carry. Indiana's averaging like closer to 5.5 when taking out sacks, or closer to 6, but not quite around 6. However, when you look at rushing success rate, Indiana is top 10 with a 47.2 rushing success rate. Oregon's outside the top 20 with a 45.1% rushing success rate. Indiana's EPA per rush is also very close to Oregon's, and in bigger games and bigger contests, like the first game between the two, Oregon won the yards per carry battle with their running backs, in large part due to more burst runs with wide open holes where they got, anywhere from 8 to 10 or close to 15 yards. And outside of that, they gave up TFLs or got stopped at the line of scrimmage. Indiana was more successful at power rushing, and we've seen them power run with limited success against Ohio State, tons of success against Alabama. Texas Tech is the best defensive line in all of college football. I would not say they have the best run defense, but it is very close. They put Oregon's rushing offense in a blender because Oregon couldn't get any explosive plays. And we've seen against Iowa where they were able to get some big runs, sometimes consistently run, but without several of those explosives, their rushing offense is vulnerable. On top of that, Indiana also has the better run defense. So better rush offense, more multiple rushing offense that can do a variety of different things, and better run defense leads me to believe that Indiana wins the rushing yards and yards per carry battle. And when you look at, how Indiana's offense profiles against this Oregon defense, one area where they have a big edge in is stuff percentage for runs and line yards. They also have an edge in havoc percentage. They have an edge in average distance on third down. Huge part of that's, running the football successfully so you're on schedule. And rushing EPA per play is pretty similar. And a lot of Indiana's touchdowns do come through the air, but they were able to score on the ground as well. When you look at kind of the opposite of that, where, Oregon, they're 23rd in rushing success rate. They are similar, just around that number per game on paper in terms of EPA per rush. Defensively, in EPA per rush, Indiana is 19th. And you got to remember earlier in the year, they gave up some big runs to Old Dominion and some mediocre teams that they've since corrected. And I think that underrates them a bit. They only allow a 37.6% rushing success rate. They're top 5 in havoc rate, and they only allow like 4 yards per carry on the ground. It's just Better run defense, better rushing offense for the Hoosiers. That's why I think they will win the ground game. Bold prediction number 2, and this is bold because in big games, Mendoza has had a knack for throwing at least one bad interception. I don't think Mendoza throws a pick here. He continues to play well into the college football playoff. He probably had his best game of the year against an elite Alabama secondary that is up there with Ohio State's and up there with Oregon's. And Indiana's receivers were gaining, even early before Alabama quit, they were gaining separation on those defensive backs. And I think that with the emergence of Charlie Becker, who wasn't a huge factor in the first game, and how Indiana's healthy offensively, they have these longer breaks, and I think that they have taken advantage of those. So it's not a normal game week where you get, 7 days in between games, 6 days in between games. You get like 9 now. For the national title, it'll be 11, and they got nearly an entire month off before the Rose Bowl. Mendoza has been playing well, and I think while Oregon's defense has done a pretty good job in pass defense this year, and I think they'll do a pretty good job in this game, one area where I don't think they will win at is interceptions. I don't think they will add a pick to their 15 already on the season. So Brandon Finney or Jaden Kennedy or Dylan Thieneman, it's a secondary that I love. I think it's one of the better secondaries in America. I also love Fernando Mendoza and his receivers and his pass protection. So I do not believe that he will throw an interception in this game. Again, going back to Indiana's offense versus Oregon's defense, look at the late down success rate, which is usually obvious passing downs or a down where Indiana is going to pass the football. Average distance on third down, the line yards, Indiana's offense doing a good job at preventing havoc plays, while Oregon is about above average at creating them. Havoc plays are sacks, tackles for loss, interceptions, for example. I think that Oregon's defense will do a good job here. I think both teams will play well, but I believe that the analytics and how Mendoza has improved as the year's gone on, I know Oregon's pass defense has as well, leads me to believe that Mendoza is more likely going to play a clean game than one that could be dirtied up here. Bold prediction number 3 is that both teams get 2 sacks at minimum. I think that Oregon will do a better job in pass rush than the last game, at least getting home. I also, though, believe that Indiana will still get pressure here. I don't know if they'll get as many sacks because I think a lot of the sacks in the first game were on Dante Moore and him just not throwing it away or him not going to his check down. And not a lot of it was on the pass rush or on the pass protection or just the raw pass rush that IU had. A lot of it was coverage sacks, Indiana playing disciplined, getting to more. And I think Indiana will do all those things. And I do think that sim pressures for IU are not something that you can just immediately diagnose. So I still think they'll have an edge there. But Moore is a experienced quarterback now. He's essentially a veteran, I would say. And on the other side, Oregon's pass rush is also humming and has improved as the year has gone on. So I think that the sack numbers are more equal than they were in the first game. And when you look at just the net stats, these teams are back and forth in a lot of areas. They're close. Indiana is the better team metrically, analytically, but these teams are not separated by multiple tiers here. At the very worst, they're separated by one tier, one full tier, with Indiana being above Oregon. And at the very best, they're probably the exact same team. And just because of the head-to-head and Indiana playing against, more top-end teams, Oregon and Ohio State, while Oregon really only played one in Indiana. Texas Tech is close, but not quite at the level of the top 3 Big Ten teams. That's the only reason why Indiana might be ranked ahead here or rated ahead here. I really like what both of these pass rushes can do. I think Oregon has more athleticism, more raw pass rush. Indiana is much better schemed there in terms of pass rush. And it should be a fantastic game. Also, Indiana is more consistent at pass blocking than Oregon is. Part of Oregon's pass blocking struggles, which are, not horrible, but also they exist, are because their tackles are so big that they're not exactly the most nimble guys. So if you can get around them with speed, you can get them. And you saw some of that just straight up with the front four of Texas Tech versus Oregon. I don't think it'll be that bad here, as Tech is the best D-line in America. But Indiana also can put their linebackers in a blitz position. They could put some of their DBs there and cause confusion on top of maybe having a speed edge there. Bold prediction number 4 is that Oregon will have more passing yards. I think this is because of 2 things. Number 1, I believe that, how do I put this? I think that Indiana will do a pretty good job stopping the run. I think their run defense has gotten better as the season's gone on. Pass rush without Daly, it's probably a little bit worse than it was when they played Oregon the first time around. Run defense, tackling, emerging depth in the backfield, all of those things have improved. And on the flip side, with Indiana, I think they'll be able to run it honestly enough. And by honestly, I don't mean honestly. I think they'll run it enough. I think Oregon will know it's coming. Indiana will show their hand, and they'll be able to still run the football for 3, 4, and occasionally 5 yards per carry to where they won't have to constantly pass it. They can run a balanced operation. I don't know if Oregon will do that here. They absolutely can. Don't get that mistaken. They can run a balanced operation against this team. I'm just not of the opinion that they will, because of what I've seen against Indiana the first time, against Iowa, against Penn State, and against Texas Tech. I believe that they're going to win passing yards because, by my interpretation of the metrics and the data and what I see from these teams, having watched them a lot, I think Oregon will have to pass this football more. And they're athletic enough and good enough on the outside, and Moore's matured enough to where I think they're going to win in passing yards and have some good plays there. When you look at Oregon's offense versus Indiana's defense, one thing they have an edge in is not just explosive plays, but actually explosive passing plays. Indiana has improved throughout the year at stopping the explosive run. They haven't really given up an explosive run ever since the Penn State game, where one of their safeties ran into the referee, and if he doesn't do that, then Singleton's tackled for a 9-yard gain instead of like a 50-yard gain. They do a really good job at stopping explosive runs, which very early in the year, like Old Dominion showed this, it looked like that maybe they weren't going to be so good there. I also think they've done a better job at tightening up the potential for allowing explosive plays on defense. But that is an area that we saw in round 1, where Oregon had some guys open that Moore didn't hit, and he also did hit Malik Benson for an explosive play. This is an area where Oregon does have a slight edge. An edge where Indiana has is, again, line yards, stuff percentage, rushing EPA allowed, and late down success rate. I think if this is a game that is decided by multiple 4th and 1s and 4th and 2s, I think that favors Indiana, because even if, like the first time, Oregon converts a majority of those, if it has to come very tough and it has to come through the ground, I think that plays into IU's hands. Oregon might actually benefit more from a 4th and 4, 4th and 5, where they can get their weapons out in space, and if they can protect Moore, he can hit them accurately downfield. Or preferably, they can just stay on schedule and run enough and, pass off of that to go downfield. Will that happen? We'll have to see. Can it happen? Yes, these teams are very close, very equal. Speaking of this, I still think Oregon runs okay. When you factor out sacks, I believe they'll be held to around, I would say, 100 rushing yards when you factor out the sacks, of course. Factoring in sacks, probably around 90 or 80, which is about what they had the first game. The first game they had, I think it was 90 or 100 or 80 when you factored out those 6 sacks. So the first game, they had a decent yards per carry with their backs. I don't think they'll have the same yards per carry here. And on the flip side of that, they'll allow less sacks. The Ducks will be held to just around 3 digits in rushing yards. They'll struggle to run the football, maybe get one 10-yard run or a 15-yard run here. But mostly I think Indiana will do a good job holding them to minimal gains and, again, forcing them to pass the football. And again, when you look at how Indiana's defense matches up with the Oregon offense, you see that in success rate, Indiana overall is better. That's because Indiana is kind of a more sustainable, consistent team. Oregon is a team that is much more explosive, like kind of more boom, but also more bust. There are downsides and upsides to both. And I believe that while Oregon has some potential edges in the pass game, that IU has advantages on the ground here. So that is my fifth bold prediction, that it ties into the first, where I think Indiana wins the rushing attack straight up, but by also holding Oregon to, triple digits, like around 100 at the best, or maybe a bit lower than that in rushing yards, they probably convincingly win that battle. Those are my bold predictions for Oregon versus Indiana for the Peach Bowl. Let me know any of yours in the comment section below. It should be a great game. It's going to be an epic rematch, and I can't wait to live react to this and cover it. Wow. This is a game that I am very, very excited for. Let me see, because we have a good amount of concurrent viewers. Let me see what you guys are thinking in the chat. Yeah. Oregon is going to be missing Davidson. Yes, but I don't think that's going to determine the outcome of the game. Maybe I'm wrong. That also does play into my prediction about the rushing attack a little bit, because he's more of their power back. Oregon's rushing attack without him is going to be even more boom or bust, and that further plays into what Indiana wants the rushing attack to be. If you can consistently run with power on IU's defense, I think you could mess up their whole operation. If it's all about trying to get the big play, then I think IU can manage there in run defense. So those are my opinions there. Want to move on to talk about 15 reasons why Indiana beats Oregon. Then we'll also talk about 15 reasons why Oregon beats Indiana. So the other side of this game. Let me quickly, because I am live now and told people I would do this, let me post the live chat here. Just posting it on Twitter. There, just wanted to post that. Forgot to do that before the show, but here we are. Okay, though. Let's talk about 15 reasons why Indiana beats Oregon. Indiana is favored by 3.5 points and given a 70.4% chance, a whopping 70.4% chance to beat Oregon per ESPN's Football Power Index. As the title suggests, I want to discuss 15 reasons why Indiana beats Oregon in a rematch in the Peach Bowl. Rematches are tough. It's hard to beat a good team twice, especially when you are not several touchdowns better than the good team that you beat, i.e. 2019 Ohio State beating Wisconsin in the Big Ten championship game in a rematch. But we've heard a lot of Indiana can't do this, or it would be the first time that anyone has ever done this, and they have done a lot of first-time things. So let's get to some of the reasons why they can win. Number one, they got a superior staff. Curt Cignetti and his staff are superior to Dan Lanning and his staff. So Bryant Haynes has commanded the second best defense per ESPN's FPI in efficiency. It's unanimously viewed as a top 5 defense, is in contention for number 1, along with Texas Tech, along with Ohio State, I think. Oregon's also played at a high level too, so is Miami's. A lot of great defenses left in the playoff. Indiana analytically is the best left in the playoff. Mike Shanahan's done a good job coordinating an excellent RPO-based attack that really no one has been able to completely shut down. Some teams have slowed it down, including Oregon the first time, just not enough to win. But no one's really shut it down. Lanning is an excellent coach. This is not a knock on Lanning or his staff, but Indiana, with less talent, has been able to do more this year so far than Oregon has, even with a wonderful staff that features Will Stein, who has done a great job with more of a pro-style offense this year compared to what he previously ran with Dylan Gabriel and Bo Nix, and Tosh Lupoy is fielding his best defense in his tenure with Oregon. Just think Indiana has the better staff here, and that can matter in a big game like this with extra time to prepare. Number 2, Indiana has the superior team. So according to sportsbooks, FPI, FEI, S&P+, F+, Indiana is power rated higher. You see this in odds. It's why Indiana is favored. It's why Indiana's given, I think a little bit too large of a 70.4% chance to win per FPI. They're the better team. They also have the head-to-head win by more than one score the first time around. And yes, Indiana won the turnover battle, but they had those 2 turnovers after going up 27-20, despite being minus in the turnover battle there. Context is important. They also won the total yards battle, the rushing battle. They just were the better team. And in that second half especially, they looked the part of the better team to Oregon. They've beaten Ohio State. They crushed Alabama. Oregon is a great team. It's why the line's only 3.5, 4.5, only there. It's not a double-digit line. But Indiana is the better team. Number 3 kind of builds off number 2, but it's power ratings. So I used power ratings to cite number 2. I'm just going to go off of that and be a little bit more specific, where Indiana is really anywhere from 3 to 4 points better in power ratings. So according to FPI, they're actually 5.1 points better in a neutral field. That's probably a bit too much. But then again, you never know. I think that both Indiana and Oregon can win. Both probably can win by double digits, since it's actually pretty easy to win by double digits in college football. If that were to happen on the IU side, their lead over Oregon would actually grow, because this is taking place on a neutral field. In S&P Plus, Indiana is favored to win by 3. According to FEI, they're favored to win by 2. They're pretty much unanimously better across the board in any model or ratings system that you use. Number 4 is that Indiana is the more sustainable team, so they don't rely as much on the explosives that Oregon does, especially on offense. Oregon gets a lot of big runs. They get some big passes. Indiana, while their average depth of target and explosiveness in the passing attack has certainly improved as the season's gone on, especially with the emergence of Charlie Becker, their rushing attack has pretty much been mostly a power operation, where they got an explosive run or maybe 2 towards the end of the Rose Bowl against Alabama, but throughout the entire game, they were doing well, getting 3, 4, 5 yards per carry about. They are more multiple offensively and defensively. Oregon is a more specialized team. And there's not exactly a lot wrong with that, but being diverse and being multiple and not really being bad in any of those areas in which you are is better than being specialized, where it's easier to put you in a box, kind of. Number 5, again, as I already mentioned, they're the more multiple team. So they do a better job at consistently getting those, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 yard plays than Oregon does. Oregon, on their run game, for example, it's 1, 2, 3, occasionally 4 yards. And then you have that 60-yard run. Or you have an incompletion here, a 5-yard check down here, and you go over the top for like a 70-yard pass attempt that goes for a touchdown. So that actually is a reason why Oregon can win in the explosiveness, but it's also a reason why Indiana can win if they limit those things. It's going to be harder for Oregon to stop and slow down IU than it will the other way around. Reason number 6 is the round 1 pick 1 quarterback. This is also a reason Oregon can win because they also have a possible round 1 pick 1 quarterback. But Mendoza is absolutely elite. He is currently second in America in QBR. He is averaging like 9 yards per pass attempt, 9.6. He has a 6-to-1 TD-INT ratio and is completing 72.3% of his passes. He's only taken 21 sacks. That is probably his lone weakness, is that sometimes he takes too many of those. But unlike some quarterbacks where they take sacks and that's a weakness, but they're always trying to run back, Fernando Mendoza either takes it or steps up in the pocket or tries to escape. He's the best quarterback remaining in the college football playoff and currently projected to be the best quarterback in the NFL when you look at what NFL analysts think of this current quarterback class. By best quarterback in the NFL, I mean best quarterback of this class. He's not going to be the best quarterback in the NFL. I would never predict something like that with really any quarterback. Number 7 is Indiana's wide receiver room is deeper than it was. Charlie Becker has emerged ever since that first game against Oregon, where Becker didn't play a ton. He didn't have a single registered catch in that game. Now, Charlie Becker has 566 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns. And he's had 3 100-yard games since November, which is really when he started to get more involved with the offense. He also had a 50-yard game against Alabama where Indiana didn't even pass it 20 times because they were that successful at running the ball, controlling the clock, keeping everyone healthy, and getting on out of there. This is important because I also believe that Oregon's defense is tightened up. And I think now that they've played some really good receiver groups, they'll do a better job defending the pass than maybe they did the first time. Luckily for Indiana, their passing offense is better than it was in round 1. So it's an interesting matchup of who's improved more and who utilizes their improvements more in the passing attack there. Number 8 is an explosive linebacker group that will do a good job cleaning up any blocks or any players that the defensive line fails to get to or that they don't totally bring down. Elijah Hardy is the team's leader in sacks. Aiden Fisher is the team's leader in tackles. And well, actually, that is Elijah Hardy, 2. Fisher is 2nd in tackles. And Isaiah Jones is 4th in tackles, and he has 7 sacks. Linebackers for Indiana are their bread and butter. They don't miss tackles. They can get to the quarterback. They're effective in pass coverage. Aiden Fisher has 2 interceptions. Isaiah Jones has an interception. All 3 combined have 5 passes defended, and they also have 2 forced fumbles. They're machines, and they're the perfect college linebacker core. That can create issues for an Oregon offensive front that, again, loves to generate those explosives on the ground. You're not going to do that against a linebacker group that is disciplined, that keeps its eye on the ball, that tackles well, and that is physical enough to hold their own weight and hold their water at the point of attack. Number 9, Indiana's elite offensive line. There's a reason they received the offensive MVP in the Rose Bowl. Pat Coogan is awesome. They're strong. They're solid. They are among the best offensive lines in all of college football. They run the football well. They pass protect well. They have depth there, which they did not have last year, and they've stayed healthier there this year than last year, at least now. In November, they had similar injury concerns to what they had last year, but they were able to weather through it because they didn't have to play 2024 Ohio State, and their team overall was better than it was last year, and they had a quarterback who was better able to handle being under pressure than Curtis Rourke. This is a team that, again, they don't miss assignments. They're powerful, and they're not undersized. They're properly sized. They have a good bevy of experience. They have a potential first-round pick in Carter Smith, easily a day 2 player, if not that. And Coogan's probably a day 3 player at center, which is pretty good for a center in the NFL, especially with how old he is. And he's had playoff experience with Notre Dame, did well there, and is now doing an exceptional job at Indiana. Number 10 is a defensive line that's underrated, that in theory and on paper is undersized, but is still effective. My friend Baldfather Betts on his channel picked Oregon to cover, likes the idea of Oregon winning, but he also mentioned how, Indiana won line of scrimmage the last time, and despite the fact that they do have a size disadvantage there, you can't use that to say that Oregon's definitely going to win, because Indiana's offensive line and defensive line are really good, effective, fundamentally sound, strong units. They are without Stephen Daly this time, and he did play for several snaps against Oregon. He was an impact there. He wasn't as big of an impact against Oregon as he was for the rest of October and November and the Big Ten title game, because they also had Kellen Wyatt playing in that game. Both Wyatt and Daly are out. Probably hurts Indiana's pass rush in this game. This D-line is still underrated, though, and I like how, as the years progressed, I feel like they've done a better job up front getting push on opposing offensive lines and shutting them down. And they'll need to do that here against the best offensive line they've played all season long, outside of maybe the Iowa Hawkeyes. Number 11, sticky defensive backs. Do we need to go any further than this? We all know D'Angelo Pons is phenomenal. Lewis Moore leads the team in interceptions. He has 6 on the year. Amari Farrell is behind him with 4. Devin Boykin has recently come on having his best game of the year, probably against Alabama in the Rose Bowl. No one has cooked this secondary. And if someone was going to, Oregon has better pass protection and a better quarterback than Ohio State, but they also don't have Jeremiah Smith or Carnell Tate, and none of their running backs are as effective as Bo Jackson in the passing game. So given how, Alabama analytically had an explosive passing attack matchup edge against Indiana, that never came to fruition. Ohio State could have too. Didn't really come to fruition outside of one play. Oregon probably ironically had more opportunities through the air than either of those teams did. That was also earlier in the season. And IU had success, getting to the quarterback there, and they were disciplined enough in coverage to win that game and hold Oregon to 13 offensive points. It's going to be hard for Oregon to score a lot against a secondary that no one has cooked, and I don't think anyone will cook. Number 12, I put this reason lower because they're not better on the lines of scrimmage by a lot compared to Oregon. These lines of scrimmage are pretty equivalent, pretty equal. But if I had to go one way, it would be with Indiana. Their offensive line and defensive line have probably a lower ceiling, especially in terms of raw talent or athleticism, than Oregon's do, but their floor is higher. They do a better job with assignments. They, I think when healthy, don't get their rear kicked as hard as I've seen Oregon's O-line at times get kicked, and they're more consistent on both sides of the football. So that's reason number 12. Reason number 13 is that Roman Hemby and Kalon Black just do their job. They fall forward for extra yards. They're powerful. They're hard to bring down. They do not have the same explosiveness that, say, a De'Aaron Hill Jr. or Noah Whittington do, or even a Jordan Davison. But they just do their job. And man, speaking of explosiveness and hard hitting, remember that first game? I expect Dylan Thieneman to tackle with how Roman Hemby was able to shove him in the end zone. That's not because he's soft. Dylan Thieneman is a very tough player, a future NFL player, a future NFL safety. That just shows how powerful Roman Hemby can be. It's not a discredit to Oregon's defense at all. It's a credit to this Indiana offense. Number 14 is that Indiana just has enough impact players to where if Oregon plays super well, if Indiana shows up, if they play a good game, and they are well coached, and I'm assuming both about both teams, that Surratt, Cooper, and Becker at receiver, and Pons and Moore at defensive back can make enough plays to turn the tide in Indiana's favor. The offensive line and defensive line we've already talked about. We've already highlighted some impact players there. I just wanted to highlight, again, those players, especially since anyone who will pick Oregon, and understandably so, will be talking about Oregon's speed edge and athletic edge, which they probably do have. I just wanted to highlight some athletes of Indiana that could win the game for them. And 15 is Oregon's staff. You just can't be as focused as Indiana's. And you can't be as focused as Indiana's because Will Stein and Lupoy are in different places, and they are the play callers on their sides of the football. On top of that, the rest of Oregon's staff, much like Indiana's, has to be knee-deep in the transfer portal. So all that does, again, it's reason number 15 because it's not going to determine the game on its own. But it's enough of an edge to where it widens point number 1 that I made, where Indiana has the better staff. If Oregon is going to win, their players are really going to need to outplay Indiana's players. And that's possible, but we haven't seen it yet this year. And it would probably require a complete game from Oregon that, again, we haven't seen. And how do you get a complete game out of a team? That's usually a coach-led thing, or player and coach-led. It's not just a player thing. Just retouching on some analytics that you've probably already seen in my preview video here, looking at the offense versus the defense, Indiana's offense versus Oregon's defense. Indiana has some good edges in terms of generating havoc plays, in terms of late down success rate and average distance on third down, and gaining lots of line yards offensively versus what Oregon does defensively. That is a matchup where you look at the spider chart and you watch film and watch these teams play and look at some yards per play analytics, and Indiana should be able to keep Oregon's defense honest on the ground. You look at Oregon's offense versus Indiana's defense, and again, you see that on the lines of scrimmage, Indiana should have at least a slight edge here. They also should be able to do enough against Oregon in the passing attack to where, as you see with the explosive plays on the bottom part of that spider chart, circle chart there, Oregon will probably have some things in the passing attack, as they did the first time. But Indiana is good enough in coverage and with their simulated pressures and with their disguises and fundamental soundness to where they should also have some edges in pass defense too, and could force 3 and outs with their passing success rate edge. Ultimately, these teams are very similar. When you look at net success, when you look at net EPA per play, and all these different metrics, these teams are, back and forth, back and forth. Indiana holds a slight edge, but are they several touchdowns better than Oregon? No, absolutely not. This should be an epic rematch in the Peach Bowl. Can't wait to watch it. We'll be covering it live on my channel as it's going on, doing play-by-play and color commentary with it. Make sure to be there at 7:30, maybe a little bit earlier, 7:20 Eastern time, when we go live to start covering that game. And check out my 15 reasons why Oregon will win, as believe me, the Ducks have several reasons why they can win the Peach Bowl and advance to the national title game. Speaking of which, let's get to that because my time is limited. Oregon is an underdog here for the second time in the season. First time they were an underdog was to Penn State, who they beat in Penn State's whiteout, and they effectively ended Penn State's season and ultimately got James Franklin fired. The second time is now in a rematch against Indiana, who beat them in the regular season 30-20. Indiana's favored by 3.5 points. Oregon is only given a 29.6% chance to win per ESPN's FPI, which, look, is about 1 1/3. That's not terrible odds. I do think their odds to win are probably at least a little bit higher than that. And I've heard a lot of people give predictions as to why Indiana's going to win. Only a few people have picked Oregon to win this thing. I wanted to give 15 reasons why Oregon will beat Indiana. Even though I am picking the Indiana Hoosiers to win, Oregon can very well win this football game. Reason number 1 behind that is the matchup circumstances. So both teams are very close together. It's hard to beat a good team twice, especially when the team you're rematching with is very close to you and has some extra motivation, some extra juice for this game. The public usually overreacts to what they saw the first time around, and you see that in betting where it's not quite Ohio State versus Texas Cotton Bowl levels of public toxicity, and even then Ohio State covered in that game despite everyone being on them. But the public and many people are still very on the Indiana side here. Even though both of these teams are very close together, they have a lot of similarities. They have some differences that cancel out each other's edge. Those circumstances very much benefit Oregon here in the rematch. Meanwhile, say Indiana was favored by a touchdown here in the rematch, it could easily be uglier than the first time, since rematches where Team A, the victor of the original matchup, is much better than Team B, as we saw with Texas Tech this year, as we saw with Ohio State and Wisconsin in 2019, and as we've seen other times before, like Texas and Georgia, and that was a very, close rematch. The victor can win again, and sometimes in a more humiliating fashion to the loser of the first game. So that's unlikely to happen here. Oregon, when you look at the spread, when you look at where the sharps are, when you look at the analysis, is not going to be projected to lose by 10 in this Peach Bowl. Could they? Yes. Could they lose by more? Yes. They could also win outright. That's what we're talking about here. Number 2, Oregon is superior athletes. I'm not going to say their players are better. Like, per recruiting, yeah. Per the entire roster, also yes. But we're only looking at certain two-deep players here and the starting roster. And Indiana's done a very good job of making much of their starting roster into NFL players. And they're physical, and they're tough, and they're strong as nails. It's insane what they've done. One thing Oregon has an edge in is team speed. It's why they have more explosives than Indiana. That's why. Their receivers are faster. Their running backs are faster. Their offensive line is bigger. Wouldn't say faster. IU's is probably faster, but I'm going off intuition there. Defensively, I think outside of a few players in the secondary like Pons, Oregon has an average, superior quickness to them there than Indiana does. There are other edges IU has, though. They're older. They're probably smarter because they are older. Their players are. They're more experienced. But Oregon has an athletic edge, and if they can close some of those other gaps, their athletic edge could take over here and help them along to a win. Number 3 is the revenge factor. J.D. Pickell is the only major channel picking Oregon to win here. My friend Baldfather Betts, who runs a smaller channel, but he's smarter than a lot of these top analysts. I'll link his video talking about the Peach Bowl down below. He's picking Oregon to cover. He's very confident in that, and he's modestly confident that Oregon can win this thing or will win this thing. No one is saying that Oregon is going to win, with rare exception. Again, it's not as bad as the Cotton Bowl last year, where I don't think anyone except for some Texas fans were picking Texas. But it's the next tier down, and that very few people are picking Oregon to win here. Sometimes that means nothing, and Cignetti and his players are probably enough of psychopaths to make that a null thing and show up with their own juice and motivation. But we don't know that for sure, and what we've seen in many of these rematches or many games where one team is favored is the other team that is the underdog shows up. And they show up and show out in a big way. And on top of that, you have the motivating factor of, hey, you lost to these guys. You don't want to lose to them again. You don't. You don't want your season ended by them. So that is definitely something that's playing in these Oregon players and coaches' minds. We'll see if it is a factor. Personally, I think it will play into Oregon showing up and having a good performance, but that does not at all guarantee a win, because that's ignoring what Indiana's mentality could be. But it is a factor that certainly supports Oregon and is a big reason why they can win. Number 4, they're a top 2 team. They are a consensus top 2 team in ratings. At the very worst right now, they're 3rd. The only team Oregon would be an underdog to, who's currently alive in the playoffs, would be IU. And if you take all the teams in college football, there would only be 2 they'd be an underdog to: IU and Ohio State. That would be it. This is a top 3 team, top 2 team, and with how Ohio State looked in big games, there is a chance that Ohio State's just favored due to like NFL players, but they don't have the actual substance to claim to be a better team than Oregon. That's helpful here because, as I mentioned, it's hard to beat a good team twice, especially when you're not in an entirely different tier of the team you initially beat. And Indiana is not several tiers above Oregon. At best, there may be a full tier above Oregon, which probably just translates to a field goal or half a touchdown. They're not several tiers or more than a touchdown, at the very worst, better than Oregon. So Oregon can definitely win this thing just looking at it mathematically. Number 5, the Ducks have a round 1 pick 1 quarterback. Dante Moore has been insane this year. He's had his ups and downs, but right now I think he's playing at a pretty high level. He has 28 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, 79 QBR, which is 13th, and he's 20th in passing yards with 3,280. He has a decision to make. Does he go to the NFL? Does he come back? He's talented enough to where he could probably make either decision and be a top 10 pick as long as he stays healthy. He's an extremely talented, great leader, excellent learner, combined leader and learner there, my bad. And just has a wonderful zip and touch to the football. He made so many layered passes against Texas Tech that impressed me. And that was something that we were right on in the quarterfinals, is that Oregon would beat Tech because of Dante Moore and him being better than Brycen Moore. Even though Oregon did better defensively than I thought they would, and Tech did worse offensively than I thought, independent of each other, if Texas Tech also had Dante Moore and quarterback was equal, that would have basically been a tied football game. Moore was the biggest difference in a game where both offensive lines struggled, both defenses dominated. Yes, Oregon got guys open probably more than Tech did, but Moore also got, flustered, pressured. Tech did a good job on defense. Moore is a player who's talented enough and good enough at his job to where he could go off and outduel Mendoza in the Peach Bowl. And if he does that, I really love Oregon's chances to win this game. Number 6 is that Oregon has a tougher defense than they did earlier in the year. Not going to say it's a tougher defense than Indiana's. Both these defenses are as tough as nails. But one thing that you can count on, I believe, is that Oregon, having seen this Indiana offense before, is probably going to be tougher and better in this game than they were in round 1. How much will that matter? I don't know. You're no longer going to have home field advantage. Therefore, Indiana probably won't have the amount of false starts they did. And that helped hold Indiana to 30 when maybe, if not for those, they score 40, as an example. So Indiana could have similar points put up on the board and Oregon performs better. There's a world where that happens because there's two sides to Indiana scoring points, Oregon's defense and their offense. But this defense is tougher and particularly better at pass rush and I think pass coverage than they were earlier in the season. Number 7 is the improved secondary. We already talked about this. So Brandon Finney Jr., Ifeoma Badegwu, Jaden Kennedy, Dylan Thieneman. It's a wonderful group. Is it thinned out? Yes. Am I going to pretend that that matters? It definitely does, but I'm not the type to project injuries because I don't think you can do that objectively. I don't think there's a formula to do that, so I'm going to stay away from it. Their secondary is better. It's more battle-tested. It's more experienced. It's athletic. Brandon Finney seems to be peaking at the right time. That's going to be helpful against the best wide receiver group they faced by a mile of the entire year. And it's a better group than they faced back in October because Charlie Becker has emerged. Number 8 is Jamari Johnson and Kenyon Sadiq. They're NFL tight ends. They have, I believe now, 1,000 yards between them. Very close. They're at 958 receiving yards, and they have a combined 10 receiving touchdowns. They'll probably break 1,000 combined yards in this game, whether a loss or a win. They are taller and bigger than Indiana's safeties and linebackers. Now, Indiana did a good job taking them away in the first game. They can this time around. But it's another thing where if Oregon does certain things right, if they game plan better, or if Moore executes better, they could turn that into a mismatch. Number 9 is an elite offensive line. I also said that about Indiana, so I turned elite into huge because Oregon's offensive line is quite literally massive. It's not fat in the way that Alabama's is, where they're not conditioned. This is a huge O-line because they are conditioned well, coached well, and Oregon wants them to be this big so they can create massive holes and points of leverage to blow open opponents on defense. It's among the nation's best. And I love Iapani Lulolu. Emmanuel Pregnan's probably the best guard in the country. Tackles Isaiah World and Alex Harkey are very serviceable and at times show that they are elite. And Dave Iuli has improved from where he was last year. It's a wonderful group. It's a big reason why Oregon can win. And number 2, you got the reliable backers in the defensive backfield. Bryce Betcher, Jerry Mixon. Betcher is one of my favorite players because he is an older player, a wiser player, and he was a walk-on, and I love walk-on stories. And Jerry Mixon is this younger, not as experienced, but more athletic player who has been well mentored, is growing into his own. I would argue Oregon upgraded at linebacker from last year to this year. Same thing with secondary. And I have a strong suspicion of that because Oregon was probably more talented on D-line last year, at least starting D-line with Derek Harmon and Jamari Caldwell, than they were this year, or at least very similar. So the defensive improvements have come from the linebacker core and from the secondary. Betcher pretty much played perfectly against Texas Tech, so he's peaking at the right time too. Number 11 is a sticky secondary. So Oregon is one of the best pass defenses in college football, much like Indiana. You just don't cook this secondary. You can move them, but you do not cook them. You don't beat them straight up. Number 12 are healthy receivers. They were not as banged up against IU the first time, not nearly as much as they were later in the year. Evan Stewart is still out, but at least these receivers are closer to their early October or September forms than they are to their November forms. If Oregon had the injuries at receiver against Iowa, and they had those today, they would not win this game. They just would not. They wouldn't have enough juice in the passing attack to force Indiana to play them honestly on defense. And it would result in an Indiana win like 8 times out of 10 probably if they had the lack of depth at receiver that they did in November. But thankfully, Gary Bryant Jr. is healthy. Decorian Moore is healthy. Kenyon Sadiq and Jamari Johnson are healthy, and Dante Moore's playing better. Number 13 is an adaptive staff. It's a great staff. It's an elite staff. It's one of the nation's best. And therefore, with how they've found ways to win games, whether Washington, where they couldn't run the football, or against Iowa, where Moore was having a really bad day and receivers kept going down like flies, or against Penn State, where they had to go for it 1 billion times on 4th down, or against Texas Tech, where they didn't really have any offense outside of occasional passing plays, and the defense basically won it for them. They've been creative. They can win in multiple ways, and I expect them to maybe change some things up entering this rematch. Number 14 is Mateo Uyunglele and Tatum Tuioti. Oregon's just better at getting pressure and getting home in pass rush than they were, say, in the regular season. I think they're getting better there. I think they're hitting their hot stride at the right time. And they could have an edge over Carter Smith and Khalil Benson or Indiana's offensive line in general. They could also not, but I like where they're at. And 15 is that Sharps are on Indiana. Or not Indiana. They're on Oregon. They might be on Indiana to win. If the line doesn't get further down than 3.5, they probably think Indiana wins, but in a close game. They're on Oregon, though, to make this a very competitive game. And in a competitive 50-50 game, well, that's a reason why Oregon can win here. The smartest bettors think that Oregon plays this within 4.5 points, some even within 3.5 points. And that's exactly in line with every model, which basically has this game a 2 to 4 point Indiana win. Occasionally you have it at a 5. Some places you probably have Indiana winning by 1 or maybe even an Oregon victory. The models say that Oregon is going to play this competitively and it will probably come down to like one score that decides it. And that says that Oregon is the proper bet here. So not necessarily saying that Oregon is very much loved to win by the smartest and best, but they are definitely given a much better shot by those than a lot of the analysts that, let's be honest, don't know what they're talking about here. Personally, I picked Oregon not to cover because we're a prediction show. We're not really a betting show. And mathematically, whoever wins in this game is probably going to cover, whether Indiana or whether Oregon. If you're looking at it from a win prediction standpoint, if you pick spread, you don't really care about the mathematical odds of who's going to win. You care about the average outcome in general, which is probably a close IU win. That tells you to pick Oregon plus 4.5 and bet that. So we don't use the same methodology of like betting channels here. We're not a betting channel, though we talk about it because a lot of people talk about it. But that is a big reason why, not the biggest, that's why I put it at 15th, but still a sizable reason why Oregon can/will win. One thing I like about Oregon here in this game is that they can get explosive plays here. Their explosive play percentage offensively is better than Indiana's on defense. Their pass explosiveness is better than IU's defensively. And they do a good job of making sure their average distance on third down is respectable so that they can run or they can pass or set up a fourth and short. They were able to do that a few times against Indiana, and they actually converted 3 to 4 of those. And I don't think that Dan Lanning is going to change his philosophy where they went for it on fourth down 8 times against Texas Tech. Now, if, say, that game looks like the Texas Tech game in regards to Oregon's offense, because Indiana's offense will not look as bad as Tech's did. Even if Oregon puts on the performance of their life, Indiana will find points against that Oregon defense, just because it's good enough. Not because Oregon's defense isn't elite, but because an offense like IU's is going to not be held to under 10. They're going to find 10, 13 at the bare minimum. If Oregon puts that offensive performance up, they're going to lose. But they also had some issues in that game that I think were corrected, and I think they got punched in the mouth early, and that probably affected them. Just there were some things that, yes, Oregon should have done differently, like probably take some more points. There were also some things that could be corrected and turned into a better offensive performance against Indiana. Looking at Oregon's defense, they could have an edge in pass defense here if they do a good enough job at forcing Indiana into some of these third and very longs on top of getting pressure. That is a must, though, and it's something that the analytics don't back up. Analytics say that Oregon will get some pressure, but overall IU will hold up well enough to convert third downs, whether third and long or just third down, and Indiana will be able to run the ball. Oregon will have to defy those if they want to maximize their chances of winning this game. Overall, both of these teams are very equal. I'm a little bit shocked that more people aren't picking Oregon here. I like people disagreeing in a game that should be close like this one. I understand why the majority is picking Indiana. You know, Indiana's favored to win. Indiana's power rated higher. IU won the first matchup, and in power ratings, they've grown in rating, while Oregon has still grown, but not to the same pace they did as Indiana did after that game. And Indiana also has better special teams, and in a close game, that can matter a lot. But Oregon has more than a fighting chance here. Oregon is second in odds to win the national title for a reason. And those are 15 reasons why Oregon will win/can win, you know, whether you want to justify the other side in a devil's argument or you're genuinely convinced that Oregon will win. I think those 15 reasons are brilliant ones as to why the Ducks can get it done. Okay, I have to go to the bathroom. Then we will blitz through the transfer portal for about 30 minutes. So I am going to be right back. Okay. All right. We can I'll be live for about like 20 more minutes. So we'll blitz through some of these topics here, and then we'll get on out of here. If that sounds good to all of you guys. Okay. So transfer portal updates for everyone. Just everyone here. Got just reset myself here. The transfer portal has been extremely chaotic, as all of you know, all of you who observe and pay attention to this wonderful sport. And I just want to talk about some teams that I think have done well in the transfer portal so far. So Oklahoma State has blown the transfer portal out of the water, bringing in over 20 new commits, new players, most of whom are from North Texas. Is Oklahoma State building a Big 12 contender? Possibly. I know that Texas Tech this season was several touchdowns better than the next best Big 12 team. They're projected to be that way probably for the rest of the Big 12's history based on current trends, though trends always change. But Eric Morris brought over his quarterback, Drew Mestemaker, from North Texas. And Mestemaker is a star, rated as a 5-star in 24/7 Sports. I probably wouldn't rate him that high myself, but he's really good, completing 68.9% of his passes. He's thrown for 4,379 yards, 34 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, an average yards per pass attempt of 9.5. They added him. Could have the best quarterback in the Big 12 next year. It'll probably be him or Sorsby. If Dampier stays at Utah, he'd be in contention. Bear Bachmeier would probably be just below some of those players. And you also look at what Oklahoma State has, where they've had key roster changes. So Mestemaker comes in at quarterback. Caleb Hawkins transfers in from North Texas, where he had a phenomenal year. Ayo Adeyi also transfers in at running back, so they have depth there. Wyatt Young was a 1,000-yard receiver, 1,000-plus yard receiver with North Texas. He comes in along with Miles Coleman, Terrence Lewis, and then on the offensive line, they've reforged that group with Johnny Dixon III. Jacob Sexton, who was a highly touted recruit at Oklahoma, is transferring to Oklahoma State, and he also got Tyler Mercer. 15 transfers are coming in from a North Texas team that was among one of the better G5 teams this year. North Texas finished 41st in FPI with a 12-2 record. In terms of efficiency, North Texas was 28th with the 9th most efficient offense, 68th most efficient defense. They'll have to improve defensively and also on special teams in the Big 12, maybe even offensively if they want to be a true Big 12 contender. But my goodness, Oklahoma State's off to a hot start in the 2026 transfer portal cycle. Another team that is off to a hot start, Wisconsin. Wisconsin said in bringing back Luke Fickell that they were going to go heavy with NIL and target the transfer portal. They have had some exciting additions. They've also added what I think are some obvious depth pieces. Let's go through those depth pieces and exciting players. Colton Joseph is the best player that they have added to their roster by a mile. No one runs on Indiana. No one. Oregon does not. Ohio State does not. Penn State had a really long run, and they were still held to like 3 yards per carry overall on the day. It's crazy. You do not run in Indiana. But guess who did? Colton Joseph. He had a 78 and I think 75-yard rushing touchdown, 179 yards on 10 carries. He had a 74.8 QBR in that game. He ran for over 1,000 yards and 13 touchdowns, passed for 2,624 with 21 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, and 3 of those came against Indiana, who may have the best defense in all of college football, 152.7 passer rating. That is an upgrade over Billy Edwards Jr., even though he's coming from the G5. And if they can rebuild the offensive line, retool it, and keep their best players on defense, and it seems like they are, then they could be this dangerous, ball control football team next year. They keep things grounded, play solid defense, and maybe Luke Fickell can win enough games to get Wisconsin off the ground next year. At running back, they're bringing in Abu Sama III from Iowa State and Brian Jackson from USC. Sama was good this season, just good, and Jackson was in a very deep USC running back room, so I like those additions. On the offensive line, Blake Cherry, Austin Kowecki, and Lucas Simmons are transferring in. I'm excited to see how that group pans out, especially with Jake Renfro transferring to Illinois and Joe Brunner entered the portal. And both of those players have shown bright moments at Wisconsin. So it's hard for me to process them upgrading from those two, but O-line is more of a unit than anything else, and they did upgrade their O-line coach. On the defensive line, Justice Boone and Junior Poyser are transferring in, and this is one of my favorite additions. Bryce West coming in from Ohio State to play corner for Wisconsin, and then Eric Fletcher and Kai Bates transferring in as well. In total, Wisconsin this season, in terms of like total players transferring in thus far, they have 18 commits, 18 of them. And I would expect close to 30 because their recruiting class was tiny, and they have, 21 outgoing transfers. So they are going to need to continue to use this portal, hopefully get some X-Factor players and not just Colton Joseph or two of the running backs, and they seem to have retained their X-Factor players on defense. So Wisconsin starting off hot in the transfer portal. Curious if Luke Fickell can revive Wisconsin with a much easier schedule next year. Other teams who are doing well in the portal, looking at Illinois. Illinois is once again using the transfer portal to get their starting quarterback. We had Tommy DeVito coming over from Syracuse, then Luke Altmaier coming over from Ole Miss. He had a celebrated career with Illinois, historic player for their program. We now welcome in Caton Hauser, who came from Michigan State to East Carolina, had success at East Carolina, was a four-star out of high school, now is transferring to Illinois. Caton Hauser had 19 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, an average yards per attempt of 8.1, had 3,300 passing yards, and completed 65.9% of his passes. Hauser has, he's kind of put it together at East Carolina. And Illinois loses a ton of their roster. They lose 4 to 5 players in the offensive line. They lose much of their defensive line, much of their defense, offense. They return a good amount at receiver and running back, actually. But that's about it. So far, Illinois has 8 commits in the portal, a long snapper, an offensive tackle. You got Hauser. You got an interior offensive lineman in Jake Renfro, some other players on defense, and a wide receiver from FAU. I love the addition of Hauser. Granted, they can keep up with other things. And they did have some additions, but for Illinois, with how much they lose, how much of their starters, and the fact they have 22 outgoing transfers on top of that, including some starters, I want to talk about what they need in the portal, because they'll probably take in a pretty big portal class, I would imagine, larger than 8 players. They lost 4 offensive linemen. They're bringing in Jake Renfro. They're bringing in Christian Martin. I imagine they'll need at least 1 or 2 more, because they're losing some to the portal, and they're also losing guys to the NFL and graduation. Like J.C. Davis this year was phenomenal. He was. So they'll need some depth, and hopefully they can get a diamond in the rough there. Quarterback depth, Luke Altmaier's gone. They also lose, who is it? Yeah, Trey Petty, who they recruited out of high school. And I forget the name of their backup quarterback, but he's gone as well. He was pretty insignificant this year anyway. He played a little bit, but Luke Altmaier was, started and was healthy for pretty much the entire season. And, he was a phenomenal quarterback. Altmaier will be missed. He was a top 15 quarterback this year, easily, if not possibly top 10. They'll need defensive linemen. All 3 of Illinois' starting defensive linemen leave. You also have at linebacker the departure of Malachi Hood and some other losses there. And David Alano went to Texas A&M in the portal. They also lose Crimmins, their punter. So they need to find replacements for those players in those areas. If they do, they can once again have a successful year next season. If not, with how tough the Big Ten is, and with Illinois not being a top recruiting program or top program, they could have a sub 500 record like they did in 2023 after an impressive 2022 season. But getting Hauser was huge because quarterback is the most important position on the field, and it's good to see they've picked up some other commitments in positions of need. Moving on once again, speaking of David Alano, let's talk about Texas A&M. A&M has the most under-the-radar transfer portal class so far. Indiana, Texas Tech, LSU, Penn State, Oklahoma State all have a lot, and I mean a lot, of good players. But Texas A&M does too, and they're not getting the exact same publicity. My favorite addition is Tawfiq Bayard, safety from Colorado. 58 solo tackles, 21 assisted, half a sack, 1 interception, and 2 forced fumbles. He is a future NFL safety. He's a wonderful addition to an A&M secondary that was good, but not quite great. And that seems to be the theme with these A&M additions that I keep seeing, especially on defense, is they were good on defense, but not great. They were below average on special teams. It's why they went out and got David Alano, who is 37 of 53 or 43 in his career with a long of 50 yards. Very accurate, can hit from 50, should do well in Aggie land. Bayard at safety, 65 tackles, 35 stops, which is basically a stuffed play or a tackle for loss, and a 74.9 PFF grade. One of the better safeties in college football is coming to Texas A&M. Ray Connie at linebacker with 23 pressures, 97 tackles, and 59 stops. He transfers in with an 86.2 PFF grade. Brandon Davis Swain, another Colorado defender. 10 pressures, a sack, 8 stops with a 61.4 PFF grade. I expect him to put up much better numbers and do better at Texas A&M than he did at Colorado. And Anto Saka was added today at the time of this recording. 27 pressures, 4 sacks, and 17 hurries with a 77.7 PFF grade. Perfect. He was one of the Big Ten's more effective pass rushers. A&M has goals of, reaching the playoffs, one day winning a title, one day winning the SEC. And I think this portal class, based on how it started off so far, could be the key to doing those things. Elko's already done a pretty fantastic job, but he needs help, and you can supplement recruiting through the transfer portal. Let's talk about Nebraska. Now, we may not have time to get through everything. I really only have 10 more minutes before I have to be somewhere. And we also have, just to let you guys know, we have guests coming on today, several of them who I'm interviewing, and those videos will all be out tomorrow, along with some of the videos today. I'm going to try to get most videos out today. The interviews and some of the remaining videos from today will be out tomorrow. And then tomorrow and Friday, I'll be at university tomorrow, but I'm only there 2 days a week, not on my live days. Oh, shoot. I have to edit the... I forgot to edit that because I was supposed to cover that. But I can do that really quickly. It still says that Kenny Minchie's going to Nebraska, which he's not, of course. He's not. He flipped his commitment to Kentucky. Now, they did get Anthony Calandria, but while Calandria is more proven, for sure, than, what's-his-face? Minchie. Calandria has, like, a very obvious turnover problem. So I don't know how well that will go. It's better than rolling with TJ Lateef, for sure. Is it better than Minchie? I'd probably say no. It's not. Calandria will not be, unless Holgerson has this amazing coaching moment, he won't be in like the top half of Big Ten quarterbacks, I don't think. But anyway, let's talk about Nebraska's portal updates. Nebraska, after Dylan Raiola entered the transfer portal after his injury and how really dead the team looked under TJ Lateef and how poor the defense was, how poor the offensive line was. They needed help in the portal. They signed a very bad high school recruiting class, and they did that somewhat intentionally, although I don't think you ever want to intentionally have a class outside the top 100, so that they could save up, that they could put stock in 2027's high school recruiting class, and they could spend big in the portal. So let's see what that looks like here. Nebraska got key transfers in Anthony Calandria at quarterback, Brendan Black at guard, Owen Chambliss at linebacker, Dwayne McDougall at safety, and Dexter Foster at linebacker. Lot of defensive players, and you also got a key interior offensive lineman who had a lot of success at Iowa State, and a quarterback in Calandria who I really like. Calandria at UNLV, coached by Dan Mullen. He's a 3-star quarterback in the portal with a 69.6 QBR, a successful runner, and I would probably say an average thrower. He's an upgrade over TJ Lateef. 23 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, 3,459 passing yards, 69.6 QBR with a 149.5 passer rating. He also had 649 rushing yards. UNLV this year finished with a 10-4 record. That's what they finished with. They lost to Boise State twice, once in the regular season, once in the Mountain West Conference championship game. Calandria previously started at Virginia, where he had some success, but ultimately Virginia wanted an upgrade from him. They got Chandler Morris there, who was an upgrade over Calandria. I think Calandria will fit well at Nebraska, especially if the offensive line is upgraded, so he can be protected. They can use his scrambling and design quarterback run abilities, and he's a good enough passer to get the football to these great receivers that Nebraska has. Brennan Black earned a 65.9 PFF grade in starting 13 games at guard for Iowa State. He's a 4-star in the portal. Owen Chambliss at linebacker and Dexter Foster. They each played and started at San Diego State and Oregon State, respectively. Chambliss at an 83.9 PFF grade with 57 stops. Foster at a 62.4 PFF grade. And Dwayne McDougall is a safety from San Diego State with a 71.8 PFF grade, 34 tackles, 9 stops. I'd say pretty okay class right now. They need to do a lot more, I believe. They probably need to get another starting caliber offensive lineman, if that's what Jeep Wade thinks. And you'd preferably want another wide receiver and probably more players on defense, because I think part of John Butler's problem last year defensively wasn't just him. He also said he didn't have the players. That angered Rule, but it's true. Nebraska does not have the players at all right now to be Big Ten contenders or even playoff contenders. So if they want to do that, if they want to make the most out of this year with this tough schedule and build towards something and regain some lost momentum, well, they need more here. But this is a good start for Nebraska, and I still think Matt Rule is doing a good job and that Nebraska's on the right course. Now, going into some other topics here, I don't know how much more time do I have? Yeah, I have enough time, but once we're done, we're going to be done here. Texas Tech is once again mining gold in the portal. So they got Brennan Sorsby, 5-star quarterback. They also got one of the top defensive linemen in the transfer portal. They're searching for a commitment possibly from Coy Parrish. That top defensive lineman, by the way, was former Wake Forest defensive tackle Mateen Ibirogba. Hopefully that's how you say his name. Sorsby was a 5-star. Ibirogba was a 4-star in the portal rankings. They also got Austin Romaine from Kansas State. They got Adam Trick from Miami of Ohio. They've done, once again, such a good job in the portal. Where is Sorsby a 5-star quarterback? No, I don't think so. But is Sorsby a huge upgrade over Baron Morton? And did Lane Kiffin also want him? So you know he's a good quarterback. Yes. So you outspent LSU, forced LSU to go to other options. Sorsby completed 61.6% of his passes for 2,800 yards, averaged 8.3 yards per attempt, 27 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. Brennan Sorsby also had a plethora of rushing yards on the ground. Really successful scrambler. Had this season. I went to Texas Tech instead of going to Cincinnati here on the stat sheet. Hold on. There it is. Brennan Sorsby had 580 rushing yards and 9 rushing touchdowns in 12 games. So close to an average of 50 yards rushing per game. And that's factoring in the negative 36 yards that he had in sacks taken. Sorsby's wonderful. He'll be one of the top quarterbacks in the nation next year. Will he be at the top? I don't think so, but in that next tier or two down, certainly. On top of Sorsby, who had an 81.5 QBR, 36 total touchdowns, and over 3,000 all-purpose yards, Austin Romaine, 76 PFF grade, 41 stops, 11 pressures. Trey White, 49 pressures, 33 stops with an 81.7 PFF grade. Trey White is coming over in the portal from San Diego State. Bryce Butler is coming from Washington, where he had 13 pressures, 14 stops, 73.6 PFF grade as a defensive tackle there. Jalen Jones at receiver, over 1,000 receiving yards. Wonderful season with the Alabama State Hornets. As I already mentioned, they gained some other commitments, like Adam Trick had a very successful season and even career with Miami of Ohio. 8.5 sacks this year with 3 forced fumbles. 4.5 sacks last year with an interception. 6'4", 242 pounds. Good length. Should do well with Texas Tech. I don't think they'll totally reload on defense. They were so old there, and David Bailey's a first-round defensive end, and they had just so much ridiculously athletic production up front that I don't think he can totally replace that. But they can do a good job. They return Bryce Pollock, and if they bring in Coy Parrish at safety, who I think he's been crystal balled to Texas Tech, not going to totally confirm that, though, they can upgrade at safety and make major breakthrough on offense and possibly be a better overall team in 2026 than they were in 2025. Penn State. Got to talk about the Nittany Lions here. Penn State has had a tremendous portal class. It really does seem like Matt Campbell wants to bring over his entire Iowa State team to Penn State and play there and win there. And honestly, I don't know if that's a bad strategy. You know, you return Tony Roas at linebacker. They're bringing in like Keanu Williams, D-tackle from UCLA, some other players from other schools, and they're retaining other former Penn State starters and current Penn State players and recruits to probably build a better version of Iowa State in Happy Valley. Matt Campbell is bringing 18 former Iowa State players to Penn State so far. I want to talk about a few of the key ones. Rocco Becht at quarterback. He'll be starting for Penn State this coming season. 16 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. Is a serviceable quarterback. Is he a great quarterback? I don't think so, but serviceable, absolutely. 60.5 completion percentage, 2,584 passing yards. I think he's just okay. Maybe Penn State fans will push back on that. I think a lot of people have overhyped Rocco Becht. He's tough. He's gutsy. He has that clutch gene, but he can also lose you games. The hope I would think is that Penn State's talent is good enough to raise his level of competition, especially in his final year in college, and help Penn State under Matt Campbell build up in year one and not have a stagnant continued regression from where it felt like Penn State could be at the end of 2024. Chase Sowell is a wonderful addition, though, at wide receiver. 2 touchdowns, 500 receiving yards, 15.6 yards per reception, 6'3", 210. Penn State's going to have better receivers this year than they did last year. They're longer, they're taller, they're better coached, they're more physical. On top of Sowell coming over, you also have Benjamin Brahmer, the tight end, who had 6 touchdowns, 446 receiving yards. They're bringing over Sowell and Edskilson at wide receiver, and they're bringing in Burkle and Brahmer at tight end. If they can retain even one of those tight ends, which I think Repillier is back at tight end, and I imagine Kobe Howard and maybe some other Penn State receivers are back, they could certainly put together an offense that's top 20. And I don't know if it'll score a lot of points. That's not usually Campbell's style. But could they have some explosiveness in the passing game that maybe they lacked under Penn State with James Franklin? I do think that's certainly possible. Some other key transfers to look at. You got Carson Hansen, who nearly hit 1,000 rushing yards, had 6 touchdowns. He's transferring over. You have Gabe Burkle, who had over 300 receiving yards. He's transferring over. Eskildson had over 500 receiving yards and 5 touchdowns. Caleb Bacon is transferring over. He was a walk-on, I think, out of high school, wasn't even rated by 24/7 Sports. He had 29 stops, 16 pressures, and a 71 PFF grade this year. And Marcus Neal Jr. is also transferring in with a 79.8 PFF grade. He did a really good job at Iowa State. I think that Penn State, with how much they lost to the portal and to the NFL in graduation, needed a lot of depth, needed a ton of experience. And Matt Campbell's just, taking the simplest way, which is probably the best way here, and just bringing over a plethora of his Iowa State roster to Penn State. Last but certainly not least, got to talk about DeMond Williams Jr. transferring out from Washington. Oh boy. One of the consequences of NIL and the transfer portal and the current era of college football that we live in is this. It's DeMond Williams, who has done nothing but good for Washington, and nothing has been done to him but good from Washington, from what I can tell at least. He is trying to leave Washington to probably go to LSU. Got offered reportedly $4 million by Washington, signed a contract to stay at Washington, earn $4 million per year. Now LSU came in because they've lost in some of their top quarterback prospects, and Lane Kiffin offered him $6 million, which, to be fair, is like a 50% raise, and you would take that. The problem is DeMond Williams, well, he signed a contract with Washington, and it's a contract that sounds strong enough to where Washington might win, and therefore I think that would get ugly. Like, would Williams play for Washington if he was forced to stay there for a year? Would he have to pay out millions in damages to transfer out? Would LSU cover that? Because that would turn into kind of like $10 million if it's fully guaranteed. Or not fully guaranteed, but if he has to stay for the whole year to earn that $4 million, would LSU have to pay Washington that $4 million and then pay Williams another $6 million to get him? That's 10. I don't know. Something I do know is that DeMond Williams Jr. is a great quarterback, hit over 3,000 passing yards, 25 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. At 5'11", 190, he's not really a prototypical NFL build. He's great. He's quick. Had a tough time against top defenses with more athletic talent than his roster had. Defenses that could especially exploit his offensive line that was shaky. I think that Washington has a chance to still continue their upward trend despite him leaving, but it is going to be very tough because he was at times their best player offensively. Did struggle against, Wisconsin, Michigan, Oregon, and Ohio State. But regardless of that, still is a pretty good quarterback, was expected to take another big leap next year, as was Washington. Washington still can. They probably won't be doing it without DeMond Williams, though. And Williams, I think, last thing I'll say about him, could be a good fit at LSU, Miami, Oregon, could really be a good fit anywhere. He has all the tools necessary for a great college quarterback. NFL, different conversation. What Washington needs, not just in response to this, but in general, obviously a quarterback, and there are good options out there. They need offensive linemen, defensive linemen, preferably at least a receiver to compensate for Denzel Boston going pro, and special teams under Jed Fish has been awful at Washington. So having a good kicker and punter and return specialist can really help in the Big Ten, can help Washington win games there. So far, Washington has I'd say pretty, good, serviceable transfer portal class. It's not one of the best in the world, but with 3 commits, including Colt Dietrich, who's a 6'6", 310-pound offensive tackle from Sam Houston. I like what they have going for them if they can build off of that, maybe get, a 10, 15 player portal class and build off what was a great year, a 9-4 year under Jed Fish at Washington. That's really all I have to say there. I mean, it sucks to lose Williams, but you got to move on from it. And I still think that Jed Fish, with the recruiting and development he has brought to Washington, can still do well. That's all I have to say, guys. that's the end of the video. Sorry for the abrupt departure, but I have somewhere to be, and then I have an interview to conduct. So I will see you guys very soon. Have a great day.